Hello, sweet friends, and welcome. This is Gina. Welcome to the Rebookery channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a process video. Because it's been so long since I've done some journaling, it's actually been since like Christmas break, because I just haven't had time. I've been so busy making journals and stuff. I just haven't had time to do journaling. I'm going to go about my process a little bit differently. So I'm feeling like I want to use some paint. So the first thing I'm doing is just kind of getting out some supplies. I grabbed a few bottles of paint. I have an idea in my head, but I have no idea where any of it is going to go. And then I reached into my scrap basket and just started pulling out some different random papers. All of it is scraps. None of it is brand new paper. So these are the supplies I'm going to use. And then the background that you see, that's just an old, it's like oh my gosh, a gigantic calendar from the 70s. And these were the covers, and I just taped them together. And then I just use this whenever I'm gluing or painting. I just kind of use it as my background. So I originally thought that I was going to put this in my little journal, and I had it out. But then I thought, wait a second, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So this actually became a really good exercise in how do you get started after you've lost your mojo, after you haven't journaled for a really long time, and you just really don't know where you're going to go with this. So I decided what I was going to do was just take one of those scrap pieces of paper, which I think was just an offcut from a page in a book. And I think what I'm going to do is just play around on that piece of paper. This is something I used to do quite a bit, probably, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, when I really was trying to figure out how to work with paints and how to work with mixed media and how to work with collage. I didn't really know what I was doing, and it was all experiment, and I didn't want to waste things. I didn't want to waste perfectly good paper and things like that. So what I would do was just take sheets of scrap paper, junk envelopes that I would get in the mail, pages that had fallen out from books, and I would just paint and collage and do mixed media on top of those. And then I would take those because, it had work on there, and whether the work was good or not, it didn't matter. But I would take those sheets and I would actually use them later on. I still have a whole collection of them, but I would use them later on as ephemera or journaling tags, or I'd cut them apart. So it was like they didn't even go to waste either. So this is just a really good way to get your juices flowing. So I start with this part of this envelope, and you're going to see this envelope is the death of me during this journaling spread because I want to use it, and I keep trying to stick it in all these different places, and finally at the very end I figure out how to use it. But I'm just cutting apart some circles. So my inspiration for this journaling spread is that the other day I was driving home from work, and I live outside of the city, so I'm out in rural area, a lot of farms, a lot of pastures. And as I'm driving home, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is just such an ugly time of year. And the sun was even out. And it was just like really ugly because the salt from all of our snow days and stuff had covered everything, and everything was just blah. And so as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, wait a second. Hang on, there's some beauty in here. So I started to look, and I looked at the sky, and I was like, yep, sure enough, there is some really pretty blue up there. I looked at the pastures that I was driving next to, and I was like, yeah, that grass, that yellow, that golden brown yellow, that is beautiful. The salt that had been covering the roads and everything, the salt that was on my car, it was this really pretty gray white. And then if you looked up into the trees, of course, I saw this brown that when it was with everything else, it looked really icky. But when you look at it by itself, it was such a beautiful, rich, muted brown. And then, of course, the shrubbery, the trees that still had some leaves in them, and then just bushes and they had some really dark green, and I thought, okay, that's beautiful too. So I started to think, I think there's a commercial, and I don't know if it's I think it's a paint company, but I don't know what paint company it is. But they did a commercial or a series of commercials a few years back where they would take a scene and then they would just take like pin drops of the color from each of the pieces of the scenery, like the sky and the ground and the snow, and then they'd put it together and it would make it like a paint palette. And so in my mind, as I'm driving home, because I actually have like, a 17-minute drive, so I have some time by myself. So as I'm driving home, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful paint palette. Those colors are beautiful. It's just they get buried in winter. They just get buried in the monotony of going to work, driving home from work. It's cold. Kids at school are crazy. They don't want to be there. You don't want to be there. Everybody wants a snow day. I mean, when's it Friday? I mean, you just get so caught up in all of that blah that you kind of forget that there's beauty out there. So that's just kind of been spinning around in my head. And I knew that I wanted to do some sort of journal spread with it. But I didn't want to go straight to my journal, so that's why I'm putting it on this card right now. And so on this piece of paper, you can see I really have no method to this. I'm just plopping things down and just playing around. And I really wanted to see, because it had been so long since I've worked with paints and glue and stuff in a creative way, I really just kind of wanted to see how my materials were doing and what they would do when I put them together. And so I'm just playing around, mushing some paint around on that paper, gluing some things, throwing in a little bit of washi, just trying to play around with those colors. And that's kind of what gets me going with this. And so as I do this, I keep pulling from that little bitty stash that I had collected. So that's kind of a key here, is I'm not pulling out anything else. I'm just kind of keeping to that little supply stash that I had, and I'm making things work. And I think that's a key of my style, is that I just make things work. Things have a way of kind of working out. Little words that I find, little pictures or diagrams that I find, colors that I find in random papers that I pull, they seem to work out. And I think that's one of my hallmarks. That's one of my things that I love about my style, is that I make do with what I have. And then in the end, it kind of all comes together. I don't know how it does that. I don't I don't know how I've gotten to that point, but it just does. And it's really cool, and I love it. And this is going to be one of those cases, because I'm able to pull out some of the words from the book pages and really kind of make them work. And it's almost like those words were meant to be in this layout from the very beginning. They weren't just a happy accident. So a lot of times whenever I'm stumped with what to do, I will pull out a colored pencil or a marker or something and just kind of do some random circles or some random shapes. And that's kind of what I'm doing here, just adding a little bit of interest. And I'm pretty much done with this card. Now I'm ready to go on and do some work in my journal. So I have to apologize right here. I did this as the sun was going down, and you are going to see a massive amount of shadows. And I apologize for the lighting. The way my room is set up, it's perfect for filming during the day when the sun is out, but when the sun goes down, it becomes a hot mess. So I apologize. You're going to see a lot of shadows. I'm going to try to edit as much as I can out, but that's just kind of the way it's going to be. So yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so I find the next spread that I have available in my journal, in my little journal, which I'm still working in, and I love, love, love it. I think I'm going to use these 2 pages right here. Not really going to think too much about it. I'm going to take the leftover paint that I had from my first little art session that I had here at the beginning, and I'm just going to smear that paint onto the page. And I'm going to try not to go and use any more paint. So I'm going to try to use up all of the supplies that I have. And you'll see I actually did a really good job. I was able to use a lot of the scraps that I cut from and things like that. So I know when I put that brown on, you might be like, oh my gosh, you're ruining it. I know that brown is harsh, but it's okay because I want that brown in there because that's what it looks like in nature. That brown is a harsh color in nature, especially this time of year when everything else is so muted. So I really wanted to keep that brown in there, and I did want it to be harsh, but the way I'm just kind of mixing all these colors in, it will tone it down, and it gives me the look that I'm actually going for. So I'm okay with it. I take my paintbrush here and I just kind of dab what's left on that little plate that I have all my paint on. And what I do is I want to take and marry the two pages together. So you can see I'm just taking some blobs and just kind of smushing them in. And then I'll go do it again down in the bottom right-hand corner and then just kind of bring the two together. And to me, that kind of helps just kind of make those two pages cohesive. So as I'm putting this paint on here, I'm starting to formulate how I want this to kind of play out. I'm thinking I want sort of a scene. So I'm going to try to do blue at the top, and then I'm going to try to do more of my darker colors down at the bottom, almost like sky and ground. So this little round thing I have, I think I got it at the Dollar Tree like a million years ago. And I think it is I want to say it's like over in the dish section, and it was like something that you could put your dishes on to dry them. And I think it was a circle when I don't remember cutting it. So I think it really was in that circle, which seems kind of odd. But anyway, it's great for taking paint and just kind of adding some texture and smushing it around. So as I flipped the page, I saw that I had stuck a spine to a little golden book. And this was an old little golden book. So this is the actual foil spines from a long time ago. And they look quite different than the golden book spines today. And for some reason, it had come off perfectly. I always like to pull those off and use them in my journaling. And this one came off perfectly. So the glue had not done its job on that book because it was really old. And I had stuck it in my journal to use, and when I turned the page and I saw it, I was like, "Oh man, that is perfect because that is such a good representation of the colors I'm trying to use." So I put that down, and then I went to that envelope, and I'm going to try to use those pieces to represent the sky. And I liked how I had already cut out of it because that's kind of how the sky looked that day. It just was like Swiss cheese. There was a lot of clouds in the sky and a lot of gray, but yet I could see peaks of blue. And the blue that was shining through was really muted, but it was blue. It was just a beautiful blue color. So I just wanted peaks of blue shining through. And then there is a piece of some wallpaper, old wallpaper. I swear that roll of wallpaper I think I have used on every single project I've ever done. And it never gets smaller. That roll is like the roll that just keeps on going. So I'm going to put that down at the bottom because the colors are perfect. It is the wheat browns and golds and yellows. And then I kind of had an idea of making a little fold out for my journaling here in the center. So I just took a piece of ledger paper that was really skinny because the ledger book is really skinny, and then just kind of ripped it in half. I'm going to use the scraps of the brown that I had used earlier, and I'm going to back the ledger paper with that brown. So I'm going to use my tape runner, just add some adhesive, because I don't want it to come up and I want it to be able to be opened. So there's where I'm going to put my journaling. So I've got like a little, almost like a little booklet. And then as I went over to my desk to find that tape runner, I found those blue circles and I thought, oh, that'd be cool to use. But when I put them on there, I did not like the blue. It was too bright. So here I am fiddling with the remains of that envelope, trying to figure out how to use it. But the problem is that it's too much blue. And I don't want that much blue because that was not how much blue was actually available that day. So as much as I want to use that, this is like the second or third time I put it away and I'm going to pull it back out. So then I went to the pages that I had cut that little bird out of, and it had a tree on there, and that's perfect because that is the exact color of brown that I want. So I just started cutting it out, and I'm gluing it in the center of this page because I wanted that brown. I wanted that harsh, dark brown. I wasn't necessarily thinking that I wanted it to represent a tree. I just wanted it to represent the color. Now that I'm finished with the spread, I do go ahead and have it represent a tree. You'll see the finished product. I actually do some pen work with some marker and some paint and turn it into a tree. So in my scrap basket, I had some game pieces and I had this little promissory note that I pulled out for the red. But as I was doing this is one of those things where the words work out. I was like, ooh, promissory note, promise. In winter, what gets you through is you know that there's always the promise of spring. And so I was like, all right, I've got to use those words. Maybe it's the title, maybe it'll be part of a longer text that I write. I have no idea, but I'm going to use those words. And then I cut that out, but then I had the scraps left over, and I wanted to use those scraps. Now, if I go back to when I was driving home, I don't know that there was a lot of red. If there was red, it was like on the fences in the cow pastures or cars that were parked in the houses as I was driving by. So I want to use the red because it looks really pretty in this spread, but I don't want to use a lot. So I'm going to cut the red up and just use little bits of it. And I'm going to kind of use it as a border. So I'm going to actually put it on the top. I think I go across the top right, and then I come down to the bottom left and just add little pieces of that little promissory note from the game. I think that was a game of life. And so this little technique of just adding small little bits, I think I talked about her. This was, oh my gosh, her last name is Ahern. Can't remember what her first name is, but I have a book of hers. And if you go back to my Finding Your Style series, I talked about her book, but this is one of the things that she did or does in her artwork, and it's just so beautiful where she just takes teeny tiny pieces of paper, whether it's an envelope or a map, and she will cut the smallest piece and then just incorporate them. And it's a great way to add interest, but you're adding it in such small amounts that it's really a detail. Like you really have to look to find it. So I love using that technique. Of course, I don't have the patience to cut teeny tiny little pieces like she does, but so my pieces are a little bit bigger. But it does. It conveys the message. It puts in a little bit of red and keeps it interesting, but doesn't overtake the entire page. So here I pull out, there's this scrap that I pulled out. It was a book, page from a book, probably a childcraft book, and it was a little poem about the fairies. And I kept thinking I wanted to use it, but it really had no place because this wasn't about fairies. And so as much as I wanted to use it and as cool as it would have been, it really didn't have anything to do with the story. So I chose not to use it, and instead I just went over and I wrote my journaling on the inside of that ledger paper, and I really just literally wrote what I did. I said something about on the way home, I thought it looked really ugly until I started to look at it, and I saw that there were a bunch of colors hidden underneath winter. Well, those words, hidden underneath winter or hidden under winter, kind of stuck in my brain, and you'll see I actually use those for the title. So now I want to go over and I want to make that, I want to reproduce that commercial that I had playing in my head where they made it a paint palette. So I took those paints that I originally started with and just made like little paint squares. And then next to the square, I just wrote what represented it on my drive home. So like I put the dried grass, the bark from the trees, the leftover leaves, and then the peaks of the blue sky. And I really think that's cool, and I like how that turned out because it looks like a paint palette. It kind of makes it look like I've categorized it or I've sorted it, which I don't know. There's something about grids and categorizing and, well, like my field guide where I put things and sort them out. I don't know, something about that just makes me giddy. So now over here, I'm just going to add, I don't know, just some little marks. I always like to put little marks to add interest. Just randomly putting little shapes, and it has been so long since I've picked up a pencil and done marks. I'm pretty much just keeping it to just lines. After I filmed this video, I went and sat and watched some TV and just kind of had my tub of markers next to me and ended up and did quite a bit of pen work. So at the very end, you'll see all the detail and stuff I added, but that's just kind of, again, another exercise in creativity. I love just sitting down with some pens and just making shapes, and it can be circles, it can be squares, it can be triangles. I'm fond of triangles, little flower shapes, and I just do them over and over and over again, and it's just mindless, and you can do it while you're watching TV, and it's a great way to practice, and it's a great way to be creative. So that was something that I did at the very end that I did not film. So here I took, I have some fabric scraps. I have tons of fabric scraps, as you know, and I wanted to incorporate some fabric because fabric right now is really near and dear to my heart. I've had some experiences in the last 2 months with a friend that I have met through fabric and just made some really good relationships, and I have some fabric that's very meaningful to me. It's not expensive fabric or, anything like that. It's just meaningful because of how I got it and who I met along the way. And so I wanted to incorporate some of those little fabric scraps. So I just went over to my machine, stitched them, and then just used a glue stick and I glued them down. I also took, and I don't know if I've done it yet, but I put some wallpaper, and it was just pieces of wallpaper that I had used originally on that piece of paper at the beginning. I put it down at the bottom too because it had some texture and it had the right color. And then I felt like I needed a title over there, and I noticed on those book pages that happened to be about birds that there was the word creepers, and I liked that because that's kind of what the colors and the beauty does in winter. It creeps. It's not there for you to see. It's kind of lurking. So I wanted to use that over on that left-hand side. And then I felt like I wanted to use the text from the book. I love using book text. So I just cut it out and I'm gluing it over on the right-hand side. And then I think I go back through later on and I find words that pop out, words that maybe are meaningful. And I just kind of put a box around them or I underline them. But I put those over there because I like the form. I like the zigzag of the lines that I cut. I like the white up against the green. I like the text. I like my messy cutting. And that seems to fill that void that I have over there. So there I am again with that silly envelope, still trying to make it work, and it just does not work. But I want to use that title promissory note. So I actually had another security envelope that was a different color, and I ended up and I use it. And I think I just take this over to my sewing machine and I run a stitch through it, and then I bring it back and I glue it down. Still haven't quite figured out how I'm going to get this title to work. And then it kind of dawns on me, promissory note, and the last line that I journaled, which was something about winter is, or spring is hidden underneath winter, or something like that. And as I come back, I'm like, okay, now I can make it work. And then that's where I come up with this title that I'm going to end up and I'm going to write. So with my journal, two things I always like to have: some sort of fabric or stitching and a photo. This time I have no photo, which is very, I don't know, that's kind of weird. I love having photos. To me, whenever I put a photo on there, it makes it mine. It's like, yep, that is Gina Johnson, cannot be copied or duplicated because nobody else has that photo. Nobody else has that memory. But I didn't do it this time. And so my page feels a little naked, but then once I look at the end result, I'm like, no, it's not naked. I was able to supplement with all the other things, and it takes the place of that missing photo. Okay, back to the envelope. I finally cut it apart, and I decide to use it as some more of that sky that's peeking through. And I kind of like how I did it on this right-hand side, because that security part, the blue is showing, but then the little cellophane window is kind of covering up some of the words, and I thought that was kind of cool. And then on the other side, I flipped it and I used the white showing through because there were some gray numbers across the top, and I thought that was kind of cool, so I stapled that on. And then just the remaining part I used as a little bit more of that blue sky peeking through. So I'm almost done here. The last thing I need to do is the title, and I thought about using stickers, and you know what? Just didn't do it. Ended up and went with my handwriting and just used a marker. Just found a marker and did my handwriting. Didn't try to do it neat at all. Went for just my regular old messy, sloppy handwriting and used the last line of my journaling as my title. And it actually fits with the word promissory note because it all came together. How in the world that happened, I don't know. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. I love that it did, but it's one of those things where it all seems to come together, and that makes my journaling so much more special when I know I kept myself to just a few supplies. I stayed true to what I was trying to convey, the memory of me driving home, and yeah, and it worked out, and that's awesome. So now I'm just finishing up with the date here, nothing fancy. And then again, I totally apologize for the shadows. Hopefully I'll be able to edit some of that out. And then yeah, so here you'll see the finished product. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Thanks for listening to me ramble. I hope you guys do something creative today and try to find some beauty that's creeping around in your neck of the woods, no matter what season it is for you. And thank you so much for all your love and support. I really appreciate everything, every comment, every kind thought that you all have. You motivate me and you inspire me, and I love that I can call you guys my friends. Have a great rest of the day, guys. Be safe this week. Bye.